Um, Anybody here for the Business Summit, December 2008? It's kind of depressing, right? What I think is most exciting about today is it's not depressing. There is enormous promise around the state, and I think the stories that we get to share and experience today are really about building on strength and building on successes that we've seen. The Oregon Business Plan has 3 goals, right? Create jobs, raise incomes, reduce poverty. And we're gathered here today to figure out how to do that together. And we're going to get an update on how we're doing against our goals. We're going to hear from some really fascinating leaders from traded sector companies who are looking out on the horizon and imagining what's next for their own business, for their own industry. We're also going to get to hear from elected leaders about how we did in the 2013 year and where we go from here. And then finally, each of you are going to get to participate in a breakout session, get your hands dirty, and really help us figure out what the priorities should look like. But first, I would like to introduce the chairman of the Oregon Business Plan, John Carter, who is in fact the chairman of Schnitzer Steel, and he's going to be interviewing our U.S. Senators Ron Wyden and Jeff Merkley. Please join me in welcoming them.
Thank you very much, Chris. Nice to see you all here today. I hope you enjoyed the regional breakfast. We're here for the dance routine now. So I'd like to introduce the 2 distinguished senators from Oregon. Senator Ron Wyden and Senator Jeff Merkley. Senator Wyden has been a critical part from the inception of the Oregon Business Plan. We're very happy to have him here with us today. And Senator Merkley has been very supportive of the Oregon Business Plan goals. So this is an opportunity to find out what's going on the federal agenda. And I'm more than happy to start it off by asking the obvious question, which is things seem to be working quite well in Washington.
Just perfectly. Perfectly.
When I was a kid, I seem to remember that party line votes were the exception. And now they've become the rule. Can you give us a little insight as to the dysfunction in Washington, or whether or not you think that there's going to be an improvement in that in the coming months?
John, I don't think there is a more important issue than starting with this one, because in my time in public service, I've not seen this kind of polarization. There are a variety of reasons, for it. I never thought growing up, for example, that we'd see ideological TV in America, that we'd see TV that just kind of reinforces people's, predispositions. So there are a host of reasons. But there's no question it's taking place, and that's why I wanted to start with one straightforward message, and that is, given the degree of polarization in Washington, what I want more than anything else, I want my time in public service marked by an effort to try to bring people together. And that's what my energy work is with Lisa Murkowski. Even in this gridlock, we got a major hydropower bill passed that the industry thinks can bring 60,000 megawatts of power. We got the safety net renewed, $100 million coming to local government. That's what the tax reform efforts are all about with Judd Gregg and Dan Coates, the education bill with Marco Rubio, the Medicare reform effort with Senator Isaacson. And I think what John is starting with is just the right question. And the reality is neither side has the votes to get what they want. So either we find some common ground or it doesn't get done. And on issues like tax reform, you see the opportunity for principled bipartisanship. Democrats want to go after special interest groups. Republicans want a more efficient tax code. I'm going to use my seat on the Finance Committee to promote both. And to wrap it up, I think you're going to hear Senator Merkley and I take a simple message to Washington, D.C. and that is we're going to export some of the bipartisanship we saw at the Oregon legislature to Washington, D.C., and we're going to stay at it until they get the message.
Thanks, Senator Wyden. Senator Merkley, do you want to give us your perspective on that?
I just want to draw attention to what Senator Wyden said, that he wants his time in public service marked by the characteristic of bringing people together. And that isn't just a lofty goal, because he's been doing that throughout his legislative service. And I think it does mark the Senate that I saw back in the mid-'70s. I was an intern for Senator Hatfield. The Senate that I worked for when I was at the Congressional Budget Office in the '80s. But let's do a little poll here. How many people think the Senate and House today are a smoothly oiled, well-operating machine? How many think there's something broken about Congress? Well, let the record show that there were no hands on the first half and a lot of hands on the second. I think a recent poll was that 92% of Americans think that Congress is broken, and it makes you wonder about the other 8%. Maybe they're not paying attention. Because certainly what we don't have is a process where issues get fully debated in committee, get to the floor, get a debate, get a vote. And that paralysis means not only that Congress cannot take on the big issues facing our nation, which is a big deal in and of itself, but it also is doing terrible impact to our international reputation, the way the world is viewing America, and it's affecting the spirit of our youth, who look at democracy and they don't see necessarily what I saw when I was in high school, which is a nation that responded to the Great Depression, responded to the challenge of World War II, created the largest middle class America or the world has ever known afterwards, and kept addressing issue after issue. To do that, we have to end a lot of the paralysis. I think that the Senate did take a big stride forward in saying that we're going to not let advice and consent under the Constitution be block and destroy, so that we can, in fact, get nominations addressed. So I have found on issue after issue, rural energy savings program, resolution to end the war in Afghanistan, the end to secret law, the bi-state trucking bill, it's possible to get partners across the aisle. We just have to keep pushing and reaching and bringing together with the notion that after a November election, it's time to quit campaigning and start problem solving.
Thank you very much. One of the things that we look at here in Oregon is a legislature that has a pretty good track record of bipartisanship in the last session. Since both of you are carriers of a long tradition of Oregon senators punching above their weight, we like the idea that this state, small though it is, has, from a population standpoint, has a disproportionate effect on national policy. So we're looking forward to seeing that in action. And Senator Wyden, one of the things that is, of course, important to the summit this year is how we can unlock our natural resources to help the rural parts of our state, which have suffered greatly and have a disproportionate piece of our poverty, our population in poverty. How do you see that we can do something to get the federal government to help us unlock those natural resources?
John, thanks. And thanks to the summit for putting such a focus on the rural part of the state. What I've always said is I'm from Portland. I love the city of Portland. My only frustration was I didn't get to play for the Trailblazers. I was too small, and I made up for it by being slow. And I'm not a United States Senator from the state of Portland. I'm a United States Senator to represent every nook and cranny in Oregon. And that's why Senator Merkley and I go to every county each year for town hall meetings. And fortunately, in the last month or so, apropos of John's question about, in effect, unlocking our natural resources, we've rolled out two major initiatives. One is on forestry, and the second is on the Klamath. And both of them are designed to make sure that we have economic policies that don't cause our rural communities to become economic sacrifice zones. I mean, if you look, for example, at the number of folks who are on SNAP benefits in rural Oregon, That's just unacceptable. The best anti-poverty program is a job. And that's why it's good that you're going to have fighting poverty on the agenda this afternoon. And let me just touch on what both the forestry and the water bill are all about. On the forestry bill, if you look at the picture of the rollout in the governor's office, you see leaders of groups associated with all of you at the summit. People like Andrew Miller of Stimson Lumber, Joe Gagne of Gagne Forest Products, Dan Justina, Alan Ford. These are leaders in the timber industry who said, we like this approach because it's going to give us some certainty to get investment back in the private sector. But we also had environmental leaders. We had advocates for the salmon. We had the scientists. We had the communities that are the guardians of clean drinking water. And the principle was all about one major consideration, and that is, let's practice good science. Let's get our forests healthy again, because that's what we need to have predictability and certainty to get folks back to work in rural communities. With respect to the water issue, I think the work that was done in the community is going to not only help the basin, I think it is going to be the national model for how to deal with tough water issues in our country. And Senator Merkley was extraordinarily helpful to us. We had a hearing on it in June. Everybody thought that this was a hopeless cause. We called an audible in the middle of the day. Folks came into the office. We had a game plan. So 5 months later, we were at the college in Klamath Falls announcing that we now have an agreement in principle after decades of fighting, an agreement that will put folks back to work in the agricultural sector, help our ranchers, help our small businesses. That's my vision of what we ought to be doing. Again, it's going to allow us to help people in a very hard-hit part of rural Oregon. But mark my words, the Klamath example is going to be exported all across the country, because that's the way we ought to manage tough water issues in America.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. Senator Merkley, I know you have a keen interest in the growth of manufacturing jobs, more or less the rebuilding of our manufacturing base in the United States. Can you give us some sense of what you think the federal government can do to help that?
Certainly, and this is very relevant to the goals of the business plan to increase the number of jobs and increase the number of the median income, better paying jobs as well as more jobs. And it's a challenge in which we're really going the wrong direction right now. That is, nationwide, 60% of the jobs we lost in the 2008 recession were living wage jobs, and only 40% of the jobs that we got back were living wage jobs. And the difference for a family is between a strong foundation for a family to thrive and a situation where they're wrestling with going from basically minimum wage to minimum wage without benefits. So manufacturing plays directly into this, because manufacturing pays significantly above the median. And here in Oregon, we are more dependent upon manufacturing than any other state. 29% of our GDP is tied into manufacturing, which is about 3% more than anyone else. And so I have been doing a Made in Oregon manufacturing tour, going from factory to factory, talking with the CEOs and the line managers and the workers about what is working for their company and how could they be more successful. And out of that have come a couple key points. One, and this is really the top point, is the training of folks ready to work in the manufacturing world, which essentially means that our children need to have their hands on tools in middle school and high school. I know this was the shop classes. Now it has a fancier name, Career Technical Education. But the BUILD Act that I've put forward is specifically about that, putting shop classes or career technical education back into the middle schools and high schools. We lost them in No Child Left Behind. We need to restore them, and that needs to be continued with a partnership in the community colleges and the Workforce Investment Act. So that is the first. The second was help with creating export markets. Obviously, you can make more things if you can sell them overseas. And there's non-tariff barriers that are relevant to that, and simply advocacy for Oregon's products that is relevant. And the third is the ability to finance, access to capital to expand and improve the manufacturing process. So what it comes down to, this is very important to us because if we do not make things in America, we will not have a middle class in America. And when the middle class has more to spend, they have more purchasing power, which reinforces the positive cycle. But those three areas are the three that I'm focused on.
It sounds very familiar. If those of you that know the business plan agenda will hear echoes
I've been
of
paying
that.
attention. I've been paying attention.
Well, thank you very much. I think the other current event story that is on everyone's mind, given the last round in the budget cycle, is how are we doing on budget negotiations?
Oh, just hunky-dory. It's all done. Here's what the budget discussions really illustrate. It's the old adage that you've got to walk before you run. What the country needs so much is a long-term budget package. And that involves two issues. One of them is taxes, and the other is Medicare. Those are the two issues that are holding up a big budget agreement, so that all of you in businesses really have some predictability and some certainty for the long term in terms of how you make your plans for hiring and for growth. I've introduced bipartisan proposals on both taxes and Medicare. I'll be rolling out a new approach on Medicare that's been able to attract people across the political spectrum dealing with chronic disease, because the reality is Medicare in 2013 is very different than Medicare when it began in 1965. A lot more cancer, stroke, diabetes, chronic disease. And I think there's an opportunity, again, an Oregon lesson, to give people better care at lower cost. So that's where we need to go, to have a long-term proposal. But you can't run until you walk. And so Senator Merkley and I are both on this budget conference that's dealing with what's called the budget sequester. And that is a Washington word for a really dumb idea. So dumb, nobody thought it ever would actually, happen, and of course it has. I was with Meals on Wheels, for example, a few days ago, and they talked about the consequences for their program, the inflexibility of the budget sequester. My hope is that Senator Patty Murray, who chairs the Senate side of the committee Senator Merkley and I are on, and Congressman Paul Ryan have worked with often, that they are going to be able to at least get a modest agreement to punch some new flexibility into the way the sequester works. It's going to be a modest agreement. I do think that the financial markets will react well simply because they're going to say, hey, those people in Washington, D.C. can barely order a Coca-Cola. At least they put together a modest agreement to modify the sequester. It isn't Oregon-style bipartisanship, but at least it would be a strong start. I think Patty Murray and Paul Ryan can get that done over the next 10 days.
Good to hear. Senator Merkley, do you want to add to that?
Well, in the year ahead, it's essential that we know now that there's not going to be another government shutdown. There's not going to be another game of chicken going to midnight as the clock ticks. And indeed, I do expect the budget agreement to come out to provide that stability for 2014. Many folks have been asking, are we risking another government shutdown? And I say, I don't think so. And then I note that I said that before the first government shutdown. And essentially, a shutdown is such bad policy. By various estimates, it costs our country perhaps $24 billion in GDP. Bad policy, bad politics isn't going to happen. I was wrong the first time, but I think the reaction re-emphasizes that people are going to work together. The folks on both sides of the conference committee disavowed any path that would lead us to another form of shutdown. Everywhere I've gone in the state, folks keep saying, we need to know what the lay of the land is. We can't keep having these crises every 3 months. That's no way to run a country, and it prevents us from making investment decisions. So as Senator Wyden noted, we need a longer-term stable vision, But at this moment, if we can get a one-year vision of agreement, that would be very positive, and that's what I expect.
Last question for both of you really pertains to the budget. Do you see that there's anything going on in this budget process that's going to put the federal government back into its traditional role of stimulating infrastructure spending?
Well, yes, I do. There are a number of bills that have been wrestled with recently that are related to infrastructure spending. One is the National Highway Act, which has to be reauthorized, and there's a lot of discussions going on around that. Another is the Senate passed the Water Resources Development Act, and every community, virtually every community, has a challenge with either the water supply infrastructure or the wastewater treatment infrastructure. And so the price of those changes has been a big barrier to investment. And therefore, we have a bipartisan bill that passed the Senate, and it includes the WIFIA, Water Infrastructure and Innovation Act, that I sponsored. It's in there, so it's ripe for discussion. Now, whether it gets done in the Budget Act itself, because the Budget Act is, by definition, basically a single number, but it can set the framework for saying both sides will go back and address this key piece. And I'm hoping that type of understanding comes out of this. Certainly, it's sitting there waiting to be grabbed because you have Democrats and Republicans who've stood up in the Senate and passed this legislation and said it makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
John, we heard the wonderful music with respect to the bridge, and when Senator Merkley and I heard all the singing, we were afraid you were going to have us dance or something out here as the second act. But the point is, no matter how you feel about the bridge, we desperately need new money for infrastructure. Particularly, we've got to find a way to bring some of this private sector money off the sidelines and invest in infrastructure. I think I found a way to do that. As part of the Recovery Act, I was able to get past something called Build America bonds. And we generated about $181 billion worth of new investment as a result of that, largely because the private sector wanted to come in. So on the Finance Committee, that's something I'm going to continue to pursue because I think it's a way to generate new revenue in a way that the public would accept. It also leads, and John, if I can just divert for a quick second to two sort of related kind of issues. Trade is so important to us. 1 out of 6 jobs in Oregon depends on international trade. The trade jobs pay better than do the non-trade jobs. Senator Merkley and I talk about making things here, growing things here, adding value to them here, and shipping them somewhere. We can't do that. We can't get them, in effect, started on the way to market without infrastructure. So there are going to be some big trade agreements that are going to be discussed in the Finance Committee and the Senate over the upcoming year, a year and a half. They're going to involve trade, but they're also going to have to involve infrastructure, because without infrastructure, we can't get those goods to market. And that leads me to one other related issue, John, and that is the Columbia River Treaty is up for consideration. This, too, is important for us. We've had this agreement, good relations with Canada for decades, but if we could pay in relation to the power we actually use, there would be hundreds of millions of dollars coming back to Oregon. This would be money that would be used, again, for infrastructure, putting folks back to work. So I think I'd just wrap it up with one last comment. After a town hall meeting recently in Southern Oregon, somebody came up and said, Ron, you know, it looks to me like that town, Washington, D.C., has just been consumed by a fireball of crazy. And I think that's a pretty fair assessment. I can tell you, Senator Merkley and I try to show up early and go home late, trying to counter it with Oregon-type solutions. That's what the summit's always been about for the last 11 years. Godspeed, Senator Merkley and I will try to make the federal government a better partner for the incredibly important work you're doing. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senators. We appreciate your support, and thank you very much for being here with us today. Thanks.
The Oregon Business Plan has 3 goals: create 25,000 jobs per year, increase Oregon's per capita income above the U.S. average by 2020, reduce poverty below 10% by 2020. So how are we doing? Oregon's economy has been steadily growing jobs since 2011, and the pace has picked up significantly in the past year. While we are below our 3-year target, in the past 12 months, Oregon has added 30,000 jobs. Along the way, we've had some exciting successes. On incomes, the story isn't so good. Oregon has continued its downward trend in average income compared to the U.S. The situation is particularly bad in rural Oregon. This relates to poor performance on the 3rd goal of the Oregon Business Plan: poverty reduction. Oregon's poverty rate sits at 17.2%, significantly higher than the national average and well above our goal of 10%. So what's next? How do we accelerate job growth and translate it into income growth and poverty reduction? First, we need to build a bridge and more. Building the I-5 bridge across the Columbia River will bring needed jobs to the region, strengthen the state's trade-dependent economy, and create long-term economic benefits. Oregon also has an enormous backlog of unmet infrastructure needs and a huge deficit in needed funding just to maintain what we have. Investing now, at a time of low interest rates and high unemployment, creates jobs today while supporting the economy in the long run. Second, we must connect education to careers. Oregon faces a mismatch between the jobs that are available and the skills that Oregonians have. Good-paying jobs in manufacturing, technical, and STEM fields are going unfilled. Training Oregonians for these jobs will lift incomes and reduce poverty. Finally, we must address the dire situation in rural Oregon. Incomes are lowest and poverty is highest there. That means sustainably using our natural resources to support timber, agricultural and energy jobs, utilizing our rural ports to spark industrial development, capitalizing on rural tourism, and supporting rural entrepreneurs. We're making progress, but we've got a long way to go. Thank you for supporting the Oregon Business Plan. Let's get to work.
So I had not considered a dance number by the U.S. senators, but perhaps we could get them to do that after lunch. What do you think? Yeah? I think it would guarantee their reelection. Would you? I thought John Carter did a great job in that last session of keeping his opinions to himself, and I would like to see if we couldn't get him to come back out. John, will you join me for a second and actually see what's on his mind? John is currently the chairman of the Oregon Business Plan, and if you get to spend time with him one-on-one, you learn that he has plenty of opinions about almost everything. And I'm curious, John, you got plenty to do at work. You have enough on your plate. Why would you decide to get involved so heavily with the business plan?
Well, Chris, I think it's, first of all, the business plan is a unique partnership. Partnership of business leaders, for our elected leaders, various community organizations and organizations around the state. It would be an honor for anyone to serve as chair. And so it's a pleasure to be involved in that. From a personal standpoint, it really reflects what I think a lot of us in this room and a lot of people in the business community have, which is an irrational affection for this state. My wife and I are both native Oregonians. Our parents were, and our grandparents were. And so
you grew up in Pendleton, is that right?
Up there on the east side of the state. And we've all felt this attachment to the state, even though in my case I spent most of my business career outside the state. Some of us in the business community a decade ago looked around at the state, and we thought that it was losing some of the characteristics that made it a really great place to be. And as a result, we decided that it was worth spending some time trying to understand why that was. People will remember the economy of the state was in some difficult straits. And we thought that some of the the more bipartisan and cooperative attitudes that had existed traditionally in Oregon were being eroded. Consequently, those leaders got together and formed a forum to put this business plan on the agenda. And it seems to have worked out pretty well in moving those things along.
It seems like it's been pretty central to a lot of the successes the state has had over the last decade. So talk to us a little bit about who's behind the plan, who makes it happen.
Well, that's a really good question. It's obviously a combination of a number of different things. First of all, the Oregon Business Associations, all of them, Associated Oregon Industries, the Oregon Business Association, Portland Business Alliance, Oregon Business Council, and a number of other chambers of commerce put together a steering committee which is utilized to develop the content of the plan.
Okay.
That steering committee then works with our elected leaders and develops the agenda for each of these annual plans. Obviously, there's some key players. One of the key players, as most of you know, is Senator Wyden, who was there at the inception. In our case, over the last few years, the important local partnership at a statewide basis has been with Governor Kitzhaber. He has been not only energetic in terms of helping us develop our goals, but has also been remarkably successful in helping us implement them, and that we owe a great deal of thanks for. I think the other person that, if I can go off script here for a minute,
please.
That deserves a great deal of thanks is Duncan Wise. This will not be something that makes Duncan happy, but as many of you know, Duncan has played a key role in the Oregon Business Council and the Oregon Business Plan in terms of making this a policy forum, which affects the best outcomes and the best policies for the entire state, and has remained a very trusted and valuable confidant to state leaders, both in the legislature and the governor, as being able to give them a true picture of what he thinks and what the various business community elements think, as well as other interests, what the right path is for the state, not just for one interest or another.
Fantastic.
So again, maybe another great round of applause for Duncan Wise and Jeremy Rogers, who helps him put it together.
So we're going to spend some time today talking about what's next. We're going to get to, this afternoon, all of us get to share what we think the priorities should be. How are we doing against goals? Let's look back first. How did we do last year? What do you think we need to be thinking about?
Well, we had a very good year.
Did we?
If you remember, the three priorities that we pulled together for the year was to fix PERS, to invest wisely in education, and to build a bridge. Talking a little about each of those, the PERS issue, of course, is a difficult issue because it affects everyone, both from the standpoint of its cost, but also individuals who have depended on PERS for their retirement. So it's not an issue that is black and white in any way of speaking. So what we saw was an unsustainable trajectory on the cost of PERS to Oregon taxpayers and Oregon government. It was really a product of the recession in 2008, which exposed a really bad design for the plan. And so that plan needed to be fixed. And I think with the efforts of, and again, bipartisan efforts with many people, we made a lot of progress over the last year. We still have a very high cost for our public pension system compared to other states and compared to our historical cost in Oregon. So it bears watching, but we made great strides last year. On the second objective of investing wisely in education, I think we did a great job. And again, this is one of the things that Duncan was key with Governor Kitzhaber and many people in this room who were involved in rethinking the way that we delivered education in Oregon. And the things that we were able to do, both in terms of the structure, in terms of giving independent boards to our universities, in terms of the kinds of money we were able to direct into K through 12, and the idea that we could reconstruct advisory boards and objectives for education. It's probably the most remarkable wholesale change in Oregon's education system in my memory.
Wow.
And so I think we did well on that. On building the bridge, we did our part. But half a bridge is not going to do the trick. But I think we've made great strides there. And between the regular session and the special session and what we expect to see happen in February, we'll have the bridge. It'll be Oregon bearing a little more of the initial load, but on the same financial framework as both states were going to do it. So from the risk standpoint, it's not, from our perspective, it's not a greater risk to Oregon. The risk really in the bridge is not building it, is not doing it. And when you look around and you see what can happen when there's an interruption of service on the bridge, either because of a part failure, as there was before Thanksgiving, that was shielded from most people who don't know that the whole lift span schedule has been changed because of that. They have to make these parts. The 1917 component of the bridge is not usually shelf ready at your local Ace Hardware. So and of course there are more catastrophic consequences that could occur, but it's a lifeline. And it is the last lift span on the interstate system. It's the blood clot in the veins of progress between Canada and Mexico, around which all our trucking is scheduled. And as you heard from the senators, as an export-oriented economy and a traded sector economy, 70% of that, or just short of 70% of that, goods are moved by truck. So that bridge is really a critical piece of infrastructure that we must address. And I think we're in good shape to do that. So I look forward to that as being a part of what we're doing.
And so it's not just about the catastrophe if we don't fix it, it's also the economic opportunity if we get it right, yes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, because it'll create somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 permanent jobs, as well as the estimate is about 1,900 construction jobs during construction, every year of construction, as well as adding somewhere between $5 and $7.5 billion to the local economy.
Wow. Okay.
It's a big deal.
So you saw the video that shared with us some of the major stats about what's happening in the region. Takeaways for you? Anything that's surprising? Anything that you think, oh, we have to figure out what to do about that, or wow, that's doing better than I expected?
Well, I think the video emphasizes a couple of things. First, if you look at our primary goals of creating jobs, getting ourselves to above the average on per capita income, and addressing poverty, as already been said this morning, those are related goals. We're not doing so well on the per capita income side. We're doing reasonably well on the jobs. Mm-hmm. That pace of creation is accelerating. A little bit of a problem in the sense that many of those jobs are at the high end and the low end of the economic scale. So we're not doing what we need to do for the middle income, or Senator Merkley mentioned the manufacturing jobs. And part of that is really tied into our education system and what our education system is producing in skill sets for our students. And we need to figure out a way to connect those opportunities, which is part of our goal for the coming year, so that people have career opportunities that are in those areas that are dependent on skill sets that we're not delivering enough of
Right.
now.
Right.
And just as an aside, Senator Merkley was talking about a shop in middle school and high school. But what people need to really focus on is that to operate a machine tool in today's environment is a skilled job. You have to be computer literate to actually turn it on,
Right.
let alone operate it. So it's a very different world than we saw 50 years ago.
The theme that you mentioned about connecting the educational system to the jobs we're creating is something we're going to hear echoed a little bit later from several of the presenters. It was definitely a theme in the conversations that I had with the businesses that we're talking to today. Other plan priorities, other things that you think besides the things that we dealt with last year and finishing the bridge, other things that you think are really critical for us to get our arms around?
Well, you know, as we said, and as you've seen in the things that we set out for the next year, we still have a real challenge in infrastructure. It's not just the bridge. It's about a decaying system of infrastructure that's critical to our traded sector economy. And we've got to do a better job of addressing that, of figuring out not only how to expand it and give it the robustness it needs for an expanding population, but just to maintain it. And that's going to be a challenge. Where we find the money to do that, how we do that financing, how maybe we can bring the private sector into it, as was mentioned earlier. Those are all things we need to do. So that's an important part, build the bridge and more. I mentioned this connecting education with careers. That's really something, as part of the educational reform we were able to achieve during this past year, that the governor and educators and people in the business plan have been really focused on. It's about implementation now. It's not just about creation of the platform or allocating the money. It's about what do we do with it, and can we actually make those connections to careers. And then lastly, I think one of the things that we've really spent a lot of time thinking about, and is a key piece of this summit, is rural Oregon.
Yep.
That's our poverty problem is in rural Oregon. Our poverty problem is not just in the cities.
And is that why our per capita income continues to lag?
That's a part of it.
Okay.
The other piece of it is this point about the living wage jobs in the middle.
Okay.
We have, for reasons that it's a very attractive state for a lot of reasons, and a lot of the people that come here very well educated, but they're educated in non-STEM related careers and non-STEM related degrees. That means that we're not providing the jobs that we need to provide, that great opportunities exist for an Intel or for other people. We have to go out of state to bring those people in.
Right.
And that shouldn't be the case. We need to be able to do that here. And the net result of all of that is that we have a lot of people who don't have the career opportunities that their education entitles them to from the standpoint of the amount of time and effort they put into it.
Parting shots, anything you want us to keep in mind?
Well, I think the other element on the rural side is we've got to do a better job of getting out of this the state of being locked in terms of using our natural resources in a way that, sensibly using them, in a way that benefits those communities that have depended on them for generations. We're just not doing a very good job at that because we're locked in extreme positions that need to be changed. And we're starting to see some thawing in that, some really good progress. Again, I give the governor credit for working on East Side forests. We need to accelerate that. And we need to do a better job in other areas of the state where natural resources are an important part of the economy and help them develop those. So that's kind of the parting shot.
I love it. And John, I just want to, on behalf of everybody here, I want to thank you for your service and spending all the hours and time that you do on the business plan. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.